You're listening to At the Mic with Keith, an independent podcast production.
Welcome to this edition of At the Mic. I am your host, Keith Malinak, a special Quick Bites edition with my special guest, Barbara Schroeder. Thank you so much for making time today. I really appreciate it.
I am happy to be here and pleased to actually see you and hear you kind of sort of in person on this Zoom.
Yeah. It's amazing what technology can do. Now, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, you were born and raised in Columbus, Ohio. Is that right?
That's true. You did your research, yeah?
I did my research, yeah.
I'm a good Midwest girl.
Absolutely. That's awesome. Well, I married a good Midwestern girl, so I gotcha. Okay, you ended up at the University of Michigan at some point, and I'm just wondering, how does that happen, considering they're such rivals on the field of play? It seems like an odd match. How did that happen?
That's a really interesting question. No one has ever asked me that. You're a great interviewer. And I wish I had some really great story, like, I got scholarships or research. They had a program. I followed my boyfriend, who was a basketball player, and he got a scholarship there. So I followed him.
Good a reason as any, right?
Yep. So
okay,
that direction.
I got you. So you and I have something in common. I went to school at the University of Nebraska in Lincoln. And while there, I had a local TV internship as well. I was also a sports intern. I believe that's how you started out.
Yes, yeah, I got McDonald's and ran the prompter for the sports dudes.
You ran to McDonald's, you ran the sports prompter. That's more than the only thing they let me do was I got to log videotapes of Nebraska Cornhuskers football games, which I don't mind considering I'm a huge football fan. But
how does that work? Yeah.
Yeah, it just seems like they entrusted you with a little bit more, huh? And that's where it started, right?
That's right. That's where it started. I got the bug for television, and I was trying to get into the news reporting world. So I took any job I could get at this station, and I worked my way up to making a promo tape for myself and running around all news stations all across Michigan and saying, hire me.
Right.
So inexperienced, but you keep doing the work, and people can't say no at some point.
Now, is it true that someone was visiting your area from Los Angeles, right? And they saw you on the local TV. I guess they were in town for a wedding or something. And next thing you know, you're living and working in LA, right?
Yeah. And my main job was Flint, Michigan. That's where I was an anchor and a reporter for quite a while. And I loved it there. It was close to family, had a couple kids there. You're the big fish in a small market. And then this guy from Los Angeles calls and says, we have a lot of money and a great position. I'm like, this isn't true. This can't be real. Sure enough, it was. And then I actually questioned whether I should go or not. And all of my friends and everybody was like, of course you should. That's a top 10 market. And I'm glad I made the leap.
Barbara, I don't know how many people can say, yeah, I went from the Flint market to Los Angeles in one move. I mean, that's incredible.
Well, and at the time, I didn't realize the magnitude of that, because I'm a very loyal, and I was very much an Ohio, Michigan girl, and I'm like, how could I leave my home? But we made it all work, and you know what? It was a way. What I didn't know back then that I know now, that it was a bigger platform with which to tell stories, and that's what I love what you're doing, because you're telling stories and you're sharing, the platform that you have with bringing interesting stories, people, that otherwise, there isn't a lot of local reporting, investigative reporting. There's not a lot that local news has kind of, gone down in stature. So I think podcasters are doing just such a great job at mining and finding good stories. And you're really good at that. So
I really appreciate that. What we like to say is everybody has a story, and it's so true. And you don't find out, like, so many of my interviews are coworkers that I have passed in the hallway for a dozen years now, and I had no clue what they were into or what they were like after they were leaving work. And it's just fascinating because everybody has a story.
It's like, take a minute, ask a question.
Right.
There's a good motto. You can have that.
I'm going to write that down. I appreciate that. Hold on, take a minute. Okay, so you have covered some serious stuff out in Los Angeles. I think one of the really big ones that comes to mind, the Menendez brothers.
Yeah.
Is that where you got into the whole true crime field. In other words, what you were covering, is that what eventually led to the other projects that you've worked on since then?
Well, it is interesting because when I first started out here, I was a weekend anchor and I was an entertainment reporter during the week. And then they knew that I had, because I was from the Midwest and I had good work ethic and values and all that, they're like, oh, she works really hard. So they started sending me out on, bigger news stories. And I loved it. It was a place where you could mine information and emotion, and it's like puzzles, right? So I was attracted to that. And then I veered over towards that kind of reporting. And the Menendez story, that really was to be in, because I was from a small town, basically. So to be in a big city with a big story and to be able to have access to, and to be asked like, hey, go talk to the police officer, like, great. And lo and behold, I met an officer back when that story happened. I met him and he was really good to me. And he gave me information and I was really good at keeping it and not, I saved it. I didn't just, so we established this trust level. Years later, he works at the Beverly Hills Police Department. And I go pitch an idea at the Beverly Hills Police Department to write a story about the first 100 years of crime in Beverly Hills. And this guy who trusted me said, yes. So we have a book out there called Beverly Hills Confidential, A Century of Stars, Scandals, and Murders. And we were able to get access to stories about a cult that operated in Beverly Hills and, the Bugsy Siegel. So it was it's nice to be able to do these stories, not just because they're like train wrecks, like, oh, look at this stuff, but to take a story and look into the emotional aspect. Like, let's kind of rewire it and see where it went wrong, how it could have been different. And is there a lesson in these stories for all of us who aren't committing crimes or aren't,
that we know of, right? I mean, everybody's got a story after all. So, okay.
Yes.
So you talk about the information and you talk about the emotion, and it's got to be sensory overload when you're looking into these cases, especially not just the ones in the 100 years of Beverly Hills history, but you've covered some intense stuff, the stuff that you mentioned there on a local level, but obviously Tall Hot Blonde that you wrote, Evil Genius, and your podcast that you're doing now, Bad Thing. These are incredibly wicked stories. Does this stuff ever, the emotion of it all that you referenced, does it ever just weigh you down? Is it causing you to lose sleep? Is it affecting you? Does that stuff get to you?
It does. And many times I question, like, wait, this is very heavy, but it's interesting. People associate me with true crime and they're like, oh, here's a story about a serial killer. You probably watched that. And I'm like, you'd be surprised to know I don't like stories about serial killers. I wouldn't have been asked to direct stories about them. And I see no redeeming value. I mean, it's just like, no, this is like, I don't want anything to do with it. The stories that I'm really drawn to, that I like to call them like an elevated true crime, where there is justice that really hasn't been had. And I'm not talking about just like, oh, somebody, we don't know who the killer is. I'm talking about, let's use Bad Thing for an example. There's a woman at the center of the story who kills someone and kills herself. And we only got to hear her husband's side of the story of what happened. And I heard some little audio snippets on 2020 that he was presenting of the woman's side of the story. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. I want to hear that. So I reached out and we were able to get a whole new look into this story. And then I brought in a therapist, to really esteemed therapist, Dr. Ramanita Devasula, to explain to us, like, where and how did this woman who was seemingly normal for 49 and a half years of her life, where and how did she short circuit and what was missing? It's almost like I would like to go back in time with these stories and figure out where we as a society, where people around these people could have helped and made a difference. It's sort of like how you get justice for lost souls. And even in Evil Genius, there was this, poor pizza delivery man who may or may not have been involved in this incredible heist. And, nobody ever got an interview with this woman, Marjorie Dale Armstrong. And, we got that and we moved the story forward and all the way back to Tall Hot Blonde, a story about a mother who impersonates her daughter online. It was the first original catfishing story before catfishing even came out. Right. Here was this woman who played two people online. It got them to believe that she was her young daughter. And nothing happened to her. One guy ended up dead. One guy ended up in prison. And nothing happened to her. So I got in a car and drove out and interviewed her because it's like, wait, can we just talk to you and find out, like, what was this all about? And as easy as it is for society to be like judgmental and quick to the trigger, like, oh, you're a bad person. there was something interesting in what she had to say.
Right. Well, I can only imagine what it does to you here. I know we're running out of time, but one of the things that I like to ask on my podcast is if you could go back in history and meet one person. I figured that Barbara Schroeder's answer would be some criminal mastermind or some psychopath. But is there anybody that stands out that you've always thought, man, I'd love to go meet that person?
Like to interview or just to meet?
Just to meet, interview, whatever. Just to hang out with, watch a football game with. I don't know, anyone.
I mean, I really do want to know who killed who at the Greystone Mansion murder mystery in Beverly Hills. So I'd probably go back to that mansion and walk around and be a detective and figure it out.
Okay, I got you. Very cool. Anything on the horizon besides the podcast, which is bad thing? Anything coming up that we need to know about?
Well, thanks for asking. We're actually working on a season 2 of Evil Genius right now because there was one co-conspirator out of 4. Somebody called them a group of social misfits. There was one co-conspirator who's never spoken. He talked to the FBI early on and disappeared, went off the radar. CNN couldn't get him. Nobody could get him. And we found him, and he has a whole new story to tell that might or might not be opening up the case.
That is awesome. I love it. Well, Barbara Schroeder, thanks so much for making time today on At the Mic. So grateful.
Thank you. Glad to know about your podcast. I'll spread the good word.
Thank you.
All right.
This has been At the Mic with Keith, an independent podcast production. Head to atthemicshow.com for archived episodes, sponsor information, and ways to connect.